The CGA Tour, a podcast unlike any other. Now your host, Calvin Alexander.
Welcome back to the latest episode of the CGA Tour Podcast. As always, here I'm your host, Calvin Glen Alexander, and I'm welcoming on here Ashton Slaughter. I didn't even have to say her name. Slaughter. All right, perfect. Well, just like you would spell it. Ashton Slaughter here, the sports editor for the O'Colly, senior at Oklahoma State, frequent fan of the O'Colly here with the CGA Tour. That's how I got into this whole podcasting thing to begin with. So, Ashton, thanks so much for joining me here on Sunday night.
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate you having me. It's been a long couple of days for me, you, Oklahoma State fans, media, all sorts of folks that keep their eyes on things happening in Stillwater, but it's good to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. If you haven't yet, please check out the O'Colly and ocolly.com and see all the latest articles, because I'm going to basically ask you, Ashton, to kind of talk through some of the things that you've already written about, but also give us the inside scoop here, as it seems like you have a good handle on what went down here kind of Friday last week, as well as, Casey Dunn and Brian Arno being, I guess the formal term would be fired, but, their positions, are vacant now.
Right.
So just kind of talk us through this last week here, what you think happened or know what happened, and what do you think it means going forward here as well, too?
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get into specific stuff with talk about Gundy specifically and the coordinator specifically and whatever else, but just as a whole, like I kind of mentioned earlier, it's just been kind of a whirlwind. A lot has happened. After a 3-9 season like that, 0-9 in Big 12 play, really disappointing just considering not only how last year ended out, making it to the conference title game, but also, being picked third in the preseason poll this year. Expectations were obviously really high. The 12-team playoffs seemed like this great expectation or this great moment maybe for Oklahoma State to seize, right? But they obviously didn't do that. And so, once the season ended, a lot of people had already for weeks been wondering what would happen in the offseason. Once it became clear that maybe there was going to be a bowl game and that maybe an X amount of wins weren't going to be reached, everybody was like, all right, so what can we change? Because something went wrong. And I think that's the hardest thing about this season when kind of reflecting is that there wasn't just one thing that went wrong. There wasn't just one problem spot, right? So people knew that changes were going to happen. And obviously last week, like you brought up and like we'll get into, I'm sure here, changes were made in multiple ways and almost even bigger changes were made, right? But so I think that shows not only one, just that level of disappointment was really true and maybe even higher than we thought it might have been once the season ended. And two, that Oklahoma State, is willing to make difficult choices and was almost willing to make a really difficult choice, in order to make the trajectory of the football program just keep going upward for years to come. So I think it says a lot about OSU, even with the familiar just culture around the program to switch things up and to not be afraid to do that. But yeah, it's definitely been a whirlwind of a week.
Yeah, it seems like it for sure. The one thing that I've always related it really back to has been Oklahoma State fan for life, was going to games in like 02, 03 when, hey, Les Miles and then the team won back-to-back Bedlams. Like that was the pinnacle of success, right? It didn't matter if we were going to a bowl game those years. It was just like, oh my gosh, we're going to this. And then Gundy's on the staff then, granted not as head coach, of course, but then he's promoted head coach, brings in, great recruiting class. It's the famous I'm a man, I'm 40 by basically defending the best recruit I think Oklahoma State's ever had, technically talent-wise, in Bobby Reed. And then we fast forward to 20 years later, and it's like, well, maybe this guy's not trying hard enough. Maybe this guy's not doing enough. Maybe there's some other stuff that he should be doing here and there. And all that stuff in between, it's like, all right, we're going to throw it all out the window because we had a 3-9 season. Is it going to be, hey, let's just throw the baby out with the bathwater, like it's all done, we should be set here and move on to the next thing? Maybe Zach Robinson's out there. Maybe there's other names out there as head coaches. It seems absolutely crazy to me that a guy would mid-NFL season in his first chance as an OC in the NFL go, you know what? College OC, though, sounds great. It just seems like a crazy deal. The Todd Monken idea seems insane as well, too. I got to be honest. But I have heard from what it seems like enough people and enough sources from other podcasters, specifically the Pistols firing guys, saying that Zach Robinson had some interest. Now, whether that's head coaching interest, offense coordinator interest, I don't think Zach Robinson's going to even entertain the question in post-game press right now for the Falcons. He's trying to get them to crisp the playoffs, and they lost again today. You're going this Sunday night, December 8th. So back to a little bit here. Why do you think the Board of Regents were at such a tipping point here with Gundy? Why do you think, hey, 3-9, we're just going to call it at this point and say, you know what? Well, we're going to push you as far as we possibly can and show you the door, but maybe not push you out of it unless you want to go.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you brought up, it seems like this one just horrible season, it almost maybe kind of seems like you're saying might be a bit of a reaction. And that might be true just to one season, but I'm going to back up a few years here. I mean, this isn't the first time that the Board of Regents and the OSU as a whole, has put pressure on Mike Gundy when it comes to his job status. I mean, in 2020, obviously, a lot of off the field stuff then, that it seemed like almost kind of pushed him to a breaking point too. But that was under different leadership, a different president, a different athletic director. And the I guess just how things have really happened in the last few years, whether it's 2 out of 3 Bedlam wins or 2 conference championship appearances and a Fiesta Bowl win, that makes you feel like that it would have been a little bit safer even after a bad year. But I think that the comment from a little bit over a month ago now, I'm pretty sure, yeah. I think that's just not still sitting well with fans. They or the critics or whoever Mike Gundy said he was trying to talk to, and so I think that it's not just this season, because I think that a few years ago, like I said, we've seen them almost be at that point before. And even though there's been success since then, Gundy, just because of his personality or whatever some people think about him, still has ruffled feathers from years ago that winning was able to, cloud over and make people kind of forget about, but then they don't. They don't win. They go 3-9 this year. And then his comment from a month ago happens. And so then it just gives people more reason to bring up the old thoughts of why they maybe had a problem with Mike Gundy in the first place. And so, yeah, like a 1-3-9 season on paper should not get Mike Gundy fired. I mean, Oklahoma State has had 9 10-win seasons in program history, and Mike Gundy in some fashion has been attached to 8 of those as a coach and as a quarterback. I mean, as a coach, he's brought them unparalleled success in the program, 18 out of 20 winning seasons, the bowl streak, the whole thing. So, it seems like from a million miles away, looking down the situation, 1-3-9 season shouldn't be the tipping point. But also, we've almost been at the tipping point before this, right? And so I think that's a kind of an important thing to remember, even though it might seem like a big thing this year. I can see the reaction thing, but I also think it's important just to remember at least the somewhat recent history of it. But the coordinators in particular, I mean, I'm sure we can go into details there, but you brought up Zach, so we can just talk about Zach specifically now too. Like the thing with Robinson, and this has kind of been floated around with OSU people, like how you brought up, and Ian Rappaport, obviously a big NFL insider, kind of put his stamp on it, which is always a pretty good thing. And he said, hey, like there was mutual interest in here for if Mike Gundy was going to be gone to be head coaching and waiting. And like you said, it would have been a head coaching role. I don't think that Zach Robinson would have left to be an OC of an NFL team like the Atlanta Falcons to come be an OC for the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Maybe the only way that could have happened, maybe, is if it was like Kyle Whittingham, like Utah head coach and waiting kind of thing. But it seemed like that wasn't really the option. It seemed like the only option was if Gundy was gone, Robinson was maybe the number 1 on the big board. And I think that's really interesting. Not only that OSU liked him a lot. I mean, I think fans really quickly like Zach Robinson. He's a young guy. Let's try and get him. But I think it's interesting too that Zach Robinson was interested in it apparently too. I think that says a lot about how he found that job appealing. But that's a crazy story in of itself, right? But I'm sure you'll ask more stuff just about the coordinators, but definitely an interesting thing as well too. But I think just remembering looking at this one season, it's not just 1-3-9 season. It's maybe a couple things just over the past years that have caused people after a bad season like this to remember what they just maybe don't like about Gundy in times of hardship.
Yeah, there's frequently a lot of people on the podcast here who are not Oklahoma alums or are not Oklahoma State fans for life, and they are Oklahoma State fans for recently or whatever, and they want to harken back specifically to, hey, you know what, like guys, when they stick around for 20 years, like Kirk Ferentz or Kyle Whittingham or whatever, how good has Utah been? Like, what have they won? Have they gotten over the hump? Have they won? Oh, they're winning Pac-12 championships year after year after year. Are they winning all this type of stuff? I do a little bit go back to like, okay, well, OU and Bob Stoops was running the conference for a while, and Stoops was head coach at OU for, 20-ish years, 15 plus at least, right? So there is that model of success where a guy goes, hey, I'm going to fade into the sunset, have Lincoln Riley come in, and still have Heisman Trophy guys that are going. But I think there's also the model of, hey, you know what? when you're around 20 years, maybe you have worn out your welcome quite some time, and it is time to bring a new scene of change around. And I don't want to say in any way, shape, or form that, hey, why would the guy take a step down? Why would he go from NFL to college? Because I also am looking at it and going, well, Gundy's the highest paid coach in the Big 12, and it's by a little bit. It's by $1 million, and at least now who knows what the new contract and exact negotiations are. Last thing I saw was that they're still waiting to sign it for at least for OSU's release. I don't know if you see anything differently there, but to ask you a formulated question here, why do you think Gundy wants to come back? Do you think he really does want to improve his brand recognition, name? Because it seems like he's at a point where he could have just called it and walked out the door and said, you know what, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, he talked about earlier in the season, I guess kind of with that Kyle Whittingham thing. We asked him at Big 12 Media Days because pretty recently before Big 12 Media Days, this summer was when Utah named Kyle Whittingham's head coach awaiting, right? And so we asked Gundy, like, hey, would you want something like that? And he was like, if the school wanted my word on that and wanted my opinion, I would love to give it, because when I'm retired here, when I'm done, I want to be in the suite on Boone Pickens, at Boone Pickens Stadium on Saturdays watching games, right? And so I think it's always convenient and the right thing to say whenever the coach is like, nah, I'm not done yet. I got energy left. I still love what I do. And Gundy was saying those things the last few weeks. And I think that when we got to Friday afternoon and it was pretty clear that things were going to go one way or the other, and that OSU, it seemed like, was not going to budge and that they wanted their way kind of or the highway. I think that Mike Gundy, in a way, could have been stubborn like how he can be sometimes. I think he could have been prideful like how we know he can be sometimes, and said, you know what? No, I've done a lot for this university in 20 years as head coach, and I'm not going to take anything less than what I deserve. And would that make a completely fair? Maybe, maybe not. But I think that also just what it shows that OSU was willing to kind of stand on their business too a little bit, right? You're like, hey, well, this is what we think is best for the program. But I think that Gundy ended up taking whatever it officially comes out to be. We've heard a bunch of different things, like you said, no official word from OSU yet. But whatever it may be, it sounds like no rollover clause, like to basically make it a lifetime contract with OSU. And I think that's a good thing, because like we've seen, things can change very quickly in college football. And some of those little details like that, like a salary reduction, whatever it may be, I think it's good because it almost gives a little bit of a wake up call to Gundy in case he needed one. And the thing about that too is just that when we got to that point, I think it showed, okay, Mike Gundy's not done. He could have hung it up, could have been prideful, could have been all the things. He could have gotten in that Boone Pickens suite a few years earlier than he probably wanted to be. But he obviously has to have some fire, because even after OSU, coming at him like that, it becoming a real big public thing, he was still wanting to do it. And I heard that, Gundy was really caught off guard by that. People that was close to him said that he was, quote, scared, and he still wanted to be OSU's coach. Like, he was scared about the thought of not being Oklahoma State's coach. He wants to keep coaching, and I was told on Friday, and he had said that weeks before too. So obviously it was true, because here we are today on Sunday night, and Mike Gundy reportedly has taken, this new deal where he gave in to OSU a little bit. And I think that shows a lot about him, not only putting down some pride, putting his pride aside, not being super stubborn, but also being like, hey, I still got some fire, like how I said I do.
Well, on that point here, what do you think this offensive and defensive schemes and the coordinators look like coming into next season? And actually, I want to take a step back here and ask you one question beforehand. A lot of it was the Board of Regents had their cards to play. They had, hey, we'll fire you for cause. And I want to go back to that for a second. What do you think the cause was or is or could even be, if we're just speculating?
Yeah. I think it would have been that off the field comment I brought up from around a month ago. I don't remember the exact line of the contract now. I've read it a couple of times, so I should. But it basically said, paraphrasing, that any conduct that's detrimental to the program, or makes the program have a bad look, or puts the program into a bad light, right? And so OSU could work that in a way that they wanted to. Mike Gundy could have took OSU to court and probably won a couple $1 million, but it would have been a lot cheaper than more than $25 million buyout, right? So I think OSU ultimately, if that's the road to end up going down, would have been fine doing that if that were the reason. But I think that would have been their argument. Would they have won that in court? Who knows? But I think that's what the cause argument would have been.
Gotcha. And then to kind of follow up with the question I started asking, but what do you think the offensive and defensive coordinators? I know Lucas Parker just put out an article here a couple hours ago that the DC Grantham has been hired on. What do you? Is that kind of confirmed universally, and what do you think about that hire so far?
Yeah, no OSU official word yet, but yeah, Grantham seems like he's in, just from other reports and just what we're hearing too. So it seems like the Cowboys have a DC, and what Grantham brings, it's kind of an interesting thing because what OSU, it seems like, was going to bring in if they let go of Mike Gundy was maybe someone like a Zach Robinson, whether it was him or someone else that was young and kind of like how Gundy was, right? I think that Gundy and Robinson are a year apart from each other. Like if Robinson were to get hired now and when Gundy got hired as head coach, they're around the same age, right? So I think that having that sort of young guy coming in to run the show and maybe build a program would have been good. But now you're seeing with Gundy around, they're bringing in lots of experience. Grantham's been in college football. He's been in the NFL. He's most recently been the defensive line coach for the New Orleans Saints. And so he's bringing a lot of experience. His most recent college football stint was with Florida. It wasn't his best stint, but I think that, hey, like, who knows? It was kind of over time. It was around COVID, whenever, who knows? But I think that at the end of the day, you're seeing he brings a lot of experience to, what this makeup of the defense could look like if they're trying to build some structure in. I think it shows that they want someone different than Brian Nardo, someone who doesn't have these years of experience. And no matter what people thought about Brian Nardo, I always thought he was really great to talk to and really great to work with. His defense, especially this season, just clearly wasn't up to par with OSU and the Big 12 standards. So bringing someone in like Grantham, even if his most recent college football stint wasn't great, he's 58 years old and has a ton of experience coaching football, right? Especially defense. So him leading the defense, I think, is a good hire. I could see how people could have questions about it. And I would wish for OSU's sake in a way that it was someone different. I think that, a different kind of voice than Gundy. They're around the same age. They're a year apart. Would have been good. But also, I think if they want to beef up on experience and go on the exact opposite of what Brian Nardo was, which is what you always hear people want to do when they hire new coaches, assistants, whatever it may be, you want to hire someone that's the opposite of who you just fired, right? And that's kind of what they did. So honestly, in that regard, I think it's a good hire.
Yeah, you always have the NBA thing is you go from having a player's coach to not a player's coach, and then back and forth every other year, right? So it totally gets you there. On the offensive side of the ball, what kind of names are you hearing might be the OC? And fingers crossed, of course, I think they have all the play calling duties and bringing their own staff, but how do you think that looks as well?
Yeah, that one's been a little bit more difficult to kind of pinpoint, it seems like, only just because there seems like there's a ton of OC jobs popping up, and the head coaches, like, obviously a really popular OC candidate across the country has been UNLV's OC, but now with Barry Odom leaving, does Barry Odom want to take him? Or is he want to go to a bigger program to be an OC than Purdue? I mean, who knows? I think that one's a little bit hard to pinpoint, but I think the thing too is that with Casey Dunn, once again, the kind of the opposite of Brian Nardo, they're replacing someone that has a deep background in OSU. 14 seasons here, was only the offensive coordinator now for 4 seasons, but still he was on staff and his face was a part of some big OSU moments. He coached anyone from Tyler Wallace to Chuba Hubbard to Ollie Gordon, right? I mean, he's coached a lot of great OSU Cowboy, offensive players. So replacing someone like that is going to be difficult. And I think that was really difficult for Gundy. It kind of sounded like, I think that, not that Nardo wasn't, but Dunn was this guy. Like I say, he's been for 14 seasons. That's a lot of trust and a lot of coach meetings and a lot of things that just build up a relationship after several years, right? So I think that was tough for him. Me and another Ocala reporter, Parker Jero, my assistant sports editor, him and I went over to Boone Pickens on last Wednesday, and we ran into Dunn. We talked to him for a little bit. He didn't want to comment on the firing, but he was super nice. And I wrote a column about that, just how, in that moment, he didn't need to really be super nice. He just got fired. Like, he doesn't have to talk to us anymore. We might never talk to Casey Dunn again, but at the end of the day, he was really nice, but it's just business. And that's the tough part probably for Mike Gundy, is that it's just business. And even though Casey Dunn's a good friend, he's been on staff for a while. It's just a tough business maybe to perform. But getting away from Casey Dunn and back to the actual kind of big board, like I said, I think it's kind of hard to pinpoint right now. But I think that having someone like, even though you're not bringing in a Zach Robinson obviously now, I think having someone young would be good. But if Gundy wants to beef up on this experience, like how we've seen on the defensive side of the ball now with Grantham, I think that's also a good call. someone that's done it at the college level. He's obviously not being afraid now to look in the NFL ranks too. So that opens up a whole nother pool of candidates that he could bring in. I think that a popular name probably would have been someone like a Holgerson. The Holgerson's reportedly signed a deal a couple of days ago, but who knows nowadays in college football, right? So I don't know. I think that this is the unit that Oklahoma State fans are probably more concerned about. The defense obviously this year was a problem, but there's been stability there, like in OSU's great years, like 2021, for example, Jim Knowles, right? Great defensive coordinator, but also even that year, people didn't like it whenever they were great. And that was a great Oklahoma State football team, and people still had problems with Casey Dunn. So I think that having a solid hire and whenever the next season starts, that getting out to a good start will be very important for whoever is hired, because for a few years now, even at OSU's good seasons, people have still found a way, to doubt a play call or doubt anything like that. But also that's just fans, so I get it.
Yeah, if you heard anything at all about maybe Marcus Arroyo, I know he's a former running backs coach. Of course, he's currently the offensive coordinator for Arizona State, who is not going to end their season for at least a couple more weeks here, as they're playing in the Peach Bowl at least, and they have some more. But that's one name that I would hope we could go after with $1 million. Is, hey, we'll pay you a little bit more than you were making Arizona State, but also they might be willing to pony up to pay more, and he also may be in line for head coaching opportunity somewhere too. If he's, that offense, watching them on Saturday or just yesterday, was pretty incredible. And now they've got some pretty incredible players, but a lot of that has to go into your OC. Is sweet. Watching Oklahoma State this year, they got some good players on the team, but it just didn't work out. So you got to give credit to the OC where it's due. Do you think there's any possibility Arroyo could come back to Oklahoma State?
Yeah, I can't say there's no possibility, right? I haven't really heard that, but maybe I'm just not in that circle where I'm hearing that. But I haven't really heard that. And I think an interesting thing though, even if it would be a decent hire, which I think it might be, if that were to happen, like you said, ASU might be willing to pony up now. They got someone like Dillingham there who has got the place fired up for football. Tempe now, after being not good for years, they have a lot of momentum. Obviously now they're in the college football playoff, but just with a guy like Dillingham firing up the program, you could see after that BYU, and I think it was his member, he's like, hey, donate to ASU, fans, donors. He was calling for donors. And so I think that that's going to be, you'll see that not only in NIL and an awesome place to be like Tempe, but also probably with their coaching staff too. So I wouldn't be surprised if the university ponied up, like you said, and dropped a bag and gave him a little bit more money. Or who knows, like you said, maybe you could move on to a head coaching role too. Might be a little bit late in the game at that point, just because of how their playoff schedule is going to work out. So maybe you try and capitalize on another great season next year, and then maybe look to make the jump. That's probably what I guess could happen if ASU another good year. I think that the playoff thing just kind of makes it a little weird, and who knows? You can always leave if you got the right job, asking for you and calling your name. But I think that ASU could definitely be a school just to pony up and be like, no, we want to keep this guy. We want to run it back with our staff because what we did was really, really great this year. So I think it'd be a good hire for OSU in theory. Yeah, it could be good. But I haven't really heard that. And then I think that ASU kind of throws it just a little bit of a wrench into plans just because of how their season ended up and what they might do the next couple of weeks or so on. So
yeah, and they've got that quarterback who's, I think, the offensive freshman of the year in the Big 12, Sam Levitt, under center. Yeah. So as long as he sticks around, which, heck, why would he leave? Yeah, that could be a program really on the rise overall, because I did not expect them to finish as well as they did. But nobody did.
I was about to say, nobody did. It's not just you. I won't just blame Cal. I'll blame everybody. I did our preseason poll. I don't remember exactly what I put them, but there's no way they were outside the bottom three. I should honestly go look now because now I'm really intrigued. I hadn't thought about that. But I'm sure I have them at best 13, 14, and at worst 16, like a lot of people did. So, yeah, definitely nobody expected that. And like you said, whether it was Levitt or coaching or whatever it is, Scatterbob is a big part of it. They just, in so many regards, looked the part for sure.
Yeah, yesterday was a true eye-opener, and as far as, okay, hang on a second here, this Arizona State team could be really good. The one thing I also took away, though, from Big 12 Championship is that Oklahoma State fans, I want us to all say that we're blessed. This 3-9 season is truly a blip of the radar. Hopefully we don't have any repeats of that, but I wish there's not won 10 games, like, ever. And, yeah, this was their first season of them winning 10 games, where I remember going 10-0, and that 10th one was in Ames. At Iowa as well, too, not too long ago, back when I was at OSU. So
Yeah.
It's one thing to be on that side of it, but the other side of it here is that Gundy did go 3-9, and it was really, really great expectations headed in the season, right? I mean, last year in the Big 12 Championship, I know myself, at least, I was thinking, should I even try to go to the Big 12 Championship? Like, we don't stand a chance against Texas. They're going to the playoff. They're going to do all the things. Back when it was just the 4 teams, not the 12, and there's just no chance we're going to win. And of course, on paper, there's no chance, and actually on the field, there was no chance. And then this season happens, like, okay, maybe we can put all the pieces together. Texas and OU are not in the conference. We can kind of get much farther. What do you think was the downfall, if there's one pinpoint to have, or do you think it's just kind of just so many different things here for why this team went 3-9 after having such great expectations?
Yeah, I think, like I said, on the field wise, there wasn't really just one problem spot, which is the toughest part. But I think the overarching thing, and I wrote about this a couple times in the beginning of the year, that OSU, with many things, whether it was winning 1-score games, its injury luck, and just some other combined things, got pretty lucky last year. And that's good. A lot of great teams that have great successful seasons get lucky. And like, that's okay. OSU last year went 6-1 in 1-score games. It seemed like every game that OSU was down in the fourth quarter, you knew they were going to somehow pull it out or go to OT and extend it and make it a big thing. And then they'd always win. And you'd be like, oh my gosh, OSU's ridiculously good. Which was really fun. And like we talked about, they made the title game off of that, and they were 10-4, and it was one of Gundy's best seasons at OSU. Now, with that being said, if you look at luck rating from last season, I'm pretty sure Oklahoma State was number 2 or 3. And what that calculates is different things like 1-score games and just how strength of schedule and just a few other things. And this year I haven't looked, but now that we're talking about it, I'd be really curious to see what OSU's luck rating is, because they just didn't seem really get all that lucky this year, but also they weren't really in a lot of opportunities to get lucky, not a lot of 1-score games. But I mean, you see all the time in the NFL, some in college football, but definitely in the NFL, like the Vikings a couple years ago won all these 1-score games. Next season, they regressed quite a bit because that just didn't have that same kind of effect in 1-score games. So I think that a little bit of last year was not only, good players like an Ollie Gordon being the best running back in the country, Brendan Presley being Brendan Presley, Nick Martin being Nick Martin, or whatever it may be. I think that definitely played a part of it. I think coaching was good last year, at least better than it was this season. I think that OSU got a little bit lucky too, and that's okay. Great teams in sports get lucky. Good teams in sports get lucky, and I have great teams. And OSU was at least a good team last season. And they got a little bit lucky, and I think that this year maybe they just didn't get as lucky. They had some bad energy luck early on with Oliver and Martin, and it's kind of all spiraled from there. And also sporadic quarterback play, it just kind of is what it is, and it's a hard thing to maybe shrug off like how I just did, especially when that level of consistency in Stillwater is so high. So that's why that this season with the new look staff, with all these things, especially after, the saga from the last 4 or 5 days, and all the drama that came out of Stillwater, it will be now important more than ever in his 21st season that he's successful, because this is by far the most amount of pressure he's out on.
Well, talking about kind of all that drama from last week, what do you think caused most of this? Do you think this was a leak from the Board of Regents, a leak from Gundy, just kind of a big, huge, just, I want to have some random word to use here, but basically just a big, huge hoopla over something that should be much more private? You would think that, hey, other universities, when this type of stuff happens, it's very closed-lipped, very buttoned up. We're not hearing as much. And also, there's just not as many rumors circulating from different Twitter accounts and Facebook statuses and radio hits and whatever, right? It just seems like, hey, if this was happening down south in Norman or even up in Tulsa, this would be they had the meeting Friday, and this is what happened from it. Not, we knew going into Friday that there were 2 separate meetings. One was earlier and whatever. What do you think kind of led to all of this drama?
Well, I think one thing to remember before even just talking about the last couple of days was whenever Chad Weibrick has been in a situation to make a tough call about firing a coach or about hiring a coach, since he took over the AD role in 2021, it's been women's basketball, men's basketball, and wrestling. And you've seen for all 3 of those hiring processes, things have been pretty quiet. I think that whenever women's basketball's a little bit different because Latrell got fired before the season could end, but then all of a sudden there was a little bit of a search, and then Hoyt came. Hoyt got fired, obviously, kind of right after the season. It was a quiet 19 days, long 19 days for the Oklahoma State men's basketball search, but boom. And then out of nowhere, John Smith retires. It seems like Coleman Scott is going to be the guy. Out of nowhere, boom, David Taylor doesn't make the trials. Okay, great. Now he's in Stillwater, and it was a whole thing, and it just happened. And so I think that up until the last couple of days of last week, things had been pretty quiet. And not saying that Chad Weiberg was all in on firing Gundy, or not saying that that was the decision that they were thinking heading into Friday's meeting or whatever it may be. But things have been pretty quiet about the fact that there was obviously a push from whoever it may be to make a coaching change. Okay. And it was pretty quiet until then. So things got out, whether that was Mike Gundy's camp, whether that's OSU trying to see public reaction. Usually most of those cases, it's the person the news is about. Who knows? Nobody was going to ever know if Gundy put that out, if someone around him did, if OSU did, whoever it may be. But yeah, obviously, like you said, whether it be national outlets or local Twitter accounts spreading false rumors, it just got a lot of stuff, right? A lot of stuff was coming out, true and not true, and maybe a little bit in between, right? And so that always makes it a little bit confusing. But it was a lot. And I think that's the thing. It got really loud, but before that, it had been pretty quiet. And I think that nobody's really going to remember that when we look back on this time. We're going to remember hearing about a 5 p.m. deadline on Friday and being like, okay, and then, sitting there at 4:55, like, okay, we don't have any news yet. What's going on? It's 5 minutes, then five passes, and we're like, okay, so I think that's where we're going to remember is the craziness of that day, from the Board of Regents meeting at 7:30 in the morning to apparently hearing something at 5 and not hearing anything the rest of the day officially. But it was pretty quiet until then, which so far has been on par when Chad Weiberg has been put in similar situations since becoming athletic director. So I think that this coaching search in a way, or not coaching search, I think this like coaching controversy in a way was a little similar to these past things that we've seen from Weiberg, but obviously that several hour window on Friday makes it seem a lot more hectic. And how that ended up, I don't know if it makes OSU look great. It seems like they've obviously no problem, keeping coordinators interested. And it sounded like before all that even happened that there were coordinators lined up. Who knows if it were the same guys or not. But that obviously hasn't hurt that at all. The transfer portal opens up tomorrow, December 9th. Nobody else has entered since then. So maybe it hasn't caused as much of a fuss as we think. But also, like I said, it opens tomorrow. And they still got a couple of spots to fill, whether that's a coordinator, if they want to switch any position coaches or whatever it may be. So we'll see in the long run how much it affects OSU. But right now, I wouldn't really too much about it. I wouldn't really worry about it, just because it seems like they're still getting business done as usual. And just because it has been on par maybe with some of the coaching stuff that we've seen the last few years under Chad.
Gotcha. Well, when it comes to Chad and basically AD here for Oklahoma State, one thing that I always do is where Mike Holder stood against Gundy. It seemed like Holder would push back, Boom Biggins would be pro Gundy, and later on in the years, kind of honestly, I kind of lost track. But it seemed as though that was kind of the line here. Where do you think Weiberg stands when it comes to getting these negotiations, when really a bunch of the, granted, hoopla from last week and kind of drama was, your Board of Regents and Gundy, but I didn't remember seeing Weiberg's name just all throughout the comments or all throughout the media from last week either.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, I think that what you just said there at the end shows a lot of what I just said in the past answer, is just that he kind of does move in silence in these situations like that, and you brought up Holder and T-Boone and all these things, and when people see videos of Chad talking or listen to Chad talk, or when I've talked to Chad, he's a soft-spoken guy who talks like this, so thinking of him maybe getting all fired up and angry like how T-Boone or Mike Holder maybe used to at Gundy might not be as, I guess, easily to picture. It might not be easy picturable, right? But I think that what this shows, kind of like I said, maybe a couple answers ago, was the fact that maybe this was a wake-up call. Since 2021, when Chad came in, there hasn't really been a situation for Mike Gundy to feel a lot of pressure, right? Chad's first season at AD, they had this great season. 2022, it was kind of a blip of a season, chalk it up to whatever it may be. And then they have another great season than they had this year. And so after this year, people were like, we got some questions, and it seemed like Chad maybe had some too, or at least people around him did, whether that's the Board of Regents, Dr. Schrum, or just big-time donors, whoever it may be. He was at least hearing it, whether it was from himself or from other people around him, that people wanted a change to be made. And so I think the fact that he even had some sort of conversations like that, not knowing how he felt one way or the other about it right now, I think that shows that, he was willing to kind of not be the soft-spoken guy and try and almost make a big time decision. And it would have been the biggest decision, maybe one of, if not the biggest decision in OSU athletics history. I mean, this is the patriarch of a program, right? Of such a successful program, the 18 years, the 9 winning seasons, all the things that we talked about earlier. And I think that Chad, even having the conversation like that as kind of his first test with Gundy, or just a first test with a coach in a big moment since he became AD, shows a lot about him. And I think that should give OSU fans confidence. And whether it's with Gundy or with whoever else moving forward, that Chad, will, if forced to make a tough decision, even more so than he already has, he's made coaching changes and he's hired coaches on all the things, he's going to be willing to do it for as long as he's around. So I think that's a good sign.
Yeah, well, when it comes to Oklahoma State, I always have this thought of, and I see it echo throughout Oklahoma State fandom as well too, of, if we lose Gundy, then we're who knows where we're at, right? Just everything falls off a cliff. He's the best coach we've ever had, and that is very true. But when it comes down to it, and then there's talk of other guys, and who would be the guy behind Gundy to come in, and it would be somebody horrible. I do want to go back to that point that I made earlier of Gundy's the highest paid coach in the Big 12. So where do you think kind of the Oklahoma State program stands when it comes to the Big 12 of, hey, if I'm an offensive coordinator, if I'm a defensive coordinator who's willing to leave the NFL, granted that's great, but it's a defensive line guy, not a DC. So, he's not moving from one spot to the other, and taking that kind of OC to OC deal as I talked about with Robinson. Where do you think Oklahoma State stands here when they're going out and trying to pitch guys, recruit guys to join the Big 12? Do you think that we are a very favorable program to join the coaching staff of, or are we kind of built the pack in the Big 12, or is there something else I'm missing as well entirely?
Yeah, I know. It's a good question. But before I answer that, I'm just going to say this real quick because I just had a second to look it up. So last season when I brought up the luck rating and stuff, 2023-24 Oklahoma State was number 2 in the country out of 133 teams. The only team ahead of them was Washington, which obviously made a big run, went to the Natty, did the whole thing. And this season, if I'm remembering correctly from looking at it a couple seconds ago, out of 134 FBS teams now, I believe Oklahoma State was somewhere in the 100 in teens. I mean, you can figure out the exact number now, but 115 out of 134. So that's a big jump. Obviously, not nearly as lucky this season as last season. So kind of just to add some stats to the last thing. But no, when it comes to what OSU is, it's an interesting question, especially with the amount of schools now in the Big 12, obviously more than 12. And you look at a place like, even if it's not a historically great football program, UCF, it's in Orlando. Orlando and Stillwater are two different places, right? UCF's vacancy has been filled now, but if OSU and UCF had both had openings, they're two drastically different jobs. As to where maybe something like in Oklahoma State and Iowa State, if both those head coaching vacancies were up at the same time, are decently similar in some ways. OSU maybe a bit more decorated program, obviously, but there's been some success there. Small Midwestern town, all built around football. So, but I think that now, and just in a new Big 12, a bigger Big 12, it's a little hard maybe to compare Oklahoma State to some of those programs like how we're used to. But when it comes to what maybe people are getting pitched on, I think it's just that recent success and how, in Stillwater, like I said, it's not in Orlando where, whether it's the Magic or whatever other team you can kind of get distracted with if they're good. Like in Stillwater, if OSU football is good, OSU football is the thing, and everybody's excited for Saturdays, and it's the whole thing. And I'm sure UCF, Bounce House, it's a great fan base and all things too, so nothing against them. But I'm just saying that with how the small town America, Stillwater, Oklahoma thing works, that's the pitch, that if this team is great, you are going to be heralded as the guy or the gal to do it. And so that's probably what Oklahoma State can really rally around with its head coaching, whether it's football, women's basketball, whatever it may be. But I think too, if they had to replace someone like a Mike Gundy, Zach Robinson we brought up, he's well aware of what that would mean. And not saying that not everybody would be. I mean, Gundy is one of the winningest coaches in NCAA history. He's done all these records and streaks and things that we could talk about for everyone here. But I wonder if people would truly know how big of shoes they'd have to step in. Obviously, like how we figured out the last week and how people have known before that, not everybody's the biggest fan of Gundy, but also his wins and everything are undeniable. So I think that also if that job was open And if there was a national coaching search for it, I think people would look at it like, I got to follow that guy. And it would be kind of tough. But I think the OSU can sell itself on the fact that, like you said, without a Texas and an OU, the Big 12 is pretty open. We saw it this year. Arizona State, like we talked about, is in the college football playoff. Nobody thought that was going to happen. Colorado makes a big jump this season. BYU was going to be kind of the mid-tier to low-tier Big 12 team. Could have easily been in the college football playoffs. We could have easily saw them this morning get unveiled and be in there. So I think it says like, hey, Oklahoma State can just as easily be in the conference championship game as Arizona State, or a wide open league. You're not having to play Georgia, Tennessee, whoever it may be, week in and week out, or Ohio State, Michigan, week in and week out. So I think that's part of the pitch, and also just being the guy or the gal to kind of run the program and just make it yours in this small town.
Yeah, I wanted to look it up just to make sure I had it right, because Arizona State was picked to finish last. They're picked to finish 16th in the Big 12 preseason wise. I mean, they had 141 votes of, they're going to finish 16th. And then you've got Iowa State here, which was picked to finish 6th in the Big 12. And they play in this championship. Of course, they get run out of Dodge, but Pop-Tarts Bowl is probably not too bad of a deal overall. It seems like that's the coveted one here going forward, which just seems crazy, honestly, but it's a whole new era. When it comes to next season, the one thing I remember hearing before the start of this past season where we went 3-9 was, hey, enjoy this season, because next year, Alan Bowman's gone, Ollie Gordon's gone, Nick Martin's gone, Colin Oliver's gone, and Graham. Colin Oliver, I don't think we've heard either way yet, if I'm right in saying that, but a couple other guys, especially on wide receivers, Brandon Presley's used all of his eligibility, and a bunch of other guys returned 20 out of 22 starters to this team. So clearly guys are going to be leaving. There, granted, there's going to be some attrition as well too, but there's so much change coming in this next season. I know it's a tough question for me to ask, so I'm kind of saving it for the last couple minutes of the podcast here to make sure that, hey, you know what, I'm not going to hold your feet to the fire here if you're wrong at all, but what do you think this next season looks like here for Oklahoma State? Is this a 6-6 team? Is this a team that we should have high expectations, low expectations? I know there's a whole new quarterback, new running back and Rodney Fields. There's going to be some new wide receivers. We're going to see new offensive line for most part as well too. And I haven't even talked about the defense of the ball for a second here on what we're going to see. And it's probably going to be a bunch of new guys as well too, I would think.
Yep. Man, that's a loaded question because there's just been so much movement. But, if I had to guess, I would say maybe it's not a 3-9 season, but I don't see an incredible comeback season for Oklahoma State. And who knows? Because the years that we seem to doubt Mike Gundy no issue the most is the years that they always seem to perform the highest. So maybe me saying this on Cal's pod will do Cowboy fans some good, and they'll be pretty happy about it, because that means next season, heck, they might go undefeated and be a really good team. But I just think it's going to be hard, especially in mainly because too the Big 12 now, we brought up the new teams, and a lot of this is just scheduling whoever you play, wherever it is. But all the teams this season were pretty competitive. Like, there wasn't one team, it seemed like, for the most part, that was unable to win a game. Even Oklahoma State, team that finished last in the conference, had one of the best running backs in the country. Almost beat BYU on the road. BYU is probably at its apex of the season. It's even though OSU wasn't competitive for a lot of the season, they couldn't be looked over. And so I think that says a lot about the state of the conference and what it might look like moving forward. That could always change, but with that being kind of the trajectory of the conference, and with OSU's trajectory trending down after a down season, I just really can't see OSU getting that 10th win season right now next season. And maybe with Garangel, Flores, or Smith quarterbacking them, and Rodney Fields being a big player, or maybe it's a couple big transfers, or maybe these new coordinator hires or whoever else Gundy and co bring on the staff can really flip things around and make it great, because it's what they always seem to do in these kind of situations. But just with some of the overhaul, like you brought up, losing all that experience, that was going to be the really, really big selling point of this team having success this season. Obviously didn't work out. But then losing all that experience, then being staff changes, whether fans want the staff changes or not, means there's going to be something different too. Let's not forget, they play Oregon in a non-conference game next year. So Oregon's number one team in the college football playoff right now, and they could win the national championship. So I think a lot of things go into it, but if I had to guess, is it 3-9? No. Is it losing season? Maybe. Is it 500 season? Likely. I think that anywhere probably between that 5 to 7, 10 and 5 range, it seems probably the most likely right now. I also think it's the most safe bet because this team, I think, can go one way or the other. And whichever way it goes, Mike Gundy is going to have a lot of comments about that. Whatever happens next season, people are going to think something about Mike Gundy, right? Especially after the last 2 days. If he has a great season, fans are going to think, why did we ever try to fire him? The Board of Regents, Chad Weiberg, whoever it may be, you guys are idiots. What are we doing? But then if he has another down season, people are going to be like, oh, well, imagine if Zach Robinson has an NFL head coaching job and doesn't want to come to Stillwater, for example. Then we'll be like, oh, well, should have jumped on Zach last year or should have made the change last year and got to rip the Band-Aid off if Gundy and them have another bad season. So I don't know. It's hard to say, but I would probably lean into it to an average Oklahoma State season, which obviously isn't what fans want to hear, and that isn't the expectation. But just with how the Big 12 conference looks, just not only it might not have an Oregon like how I brought up or an Ohio State, but it has a lot of BYU's, Colorado's, and Baylor's who somehow weren't picked to finish really high in the Big 12 and then finished really high. Arizona State was picked 16th and they won the dang thing. So I think in a conference like that, it's really hard. But at the same time, that also could be an argument for Oklahoma State to have a great season too.
Yeah, I got to say, I mean, Baylor was picked to finish here preseason-wise 12th. And if you had told me, hey, they're going to be playing LSU in a bowl game here into the season, I would have no way, shape, or form believed you. But of course, I would not have believed anyone saying Oklahoma State would go 0-9 in conference for the first time. I mean, just there's so many odd things about this season here. So, I mean, to put a bow on the whole thing, kind of end it out. How will you remember this season? Will it be the Gundy kind of coaching stuff? Do you think? But this past week, do you think it'll be more of the hey, what could have should at quarterback or the defense was this bad? How will you remember your I mean, of course your senior college season as well too. Here covering the team, being the sports editor for the O'Colly.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of, even while you were asking the question, I kind of started pondering it because I'm like, I haven't really thought about that. How will I remember this last season? Man, I think I don't think it'll be this Friday quarterback play or the injuries or the defense or whatever. Just because, like I said, I think that on the field, I'm not going to look back at this team and think, man, if only they did this one thing, right? If only this one thing happened. Because if let's say Nick Martin and Colin Oliver are healthy the whole season, this team might not. It's probably not 0-9 in Big 12 play, but are they 9-0? Probably not, right? So I don't know. I don't think I can point to just one thing. I think what I'll remember the most isn't the coaching search stuff and all of the drama, but I think that I'll remember what led up to that and the frustration, how it had been building, and how uncharacteristic this season was. You brought up, I mean, first winless Big 12 conference season under Mike Gundy. Nobody would have thought that coming into the season, right? We were talking about preseason polls. I pulled mine up and I had picked BYU 12, Houston 13, or BYU 12, Colorado 13, Houston 14, Baylor 15, Arizona State 16. So 4 out of those 5 teams I put at the bottom, all of being really good. So I think I'll remember the Big 12 conference being just absolute just question mark that like after the season, because now I'm wondering what I'm supposed to know heading into next season. And I'll just remember the season just for being, really wild. Arizona State making a jump and a team like Oklahoma State free falling to that 16th spot that we thought Arizona State was going to be at. So I think I'll remember more so what led to all of this and just the storylines. And last week, I mean, early last week, hearing that something as big as what happened last Friday was even a thought was like, oh, wow, like that was something we heard early last week. And we were kind of trying to figure out what that might look like. And then we got to Saturday when it became official that Gundy was staying. And it was like, wow, that was a 5-day stretch. So I think that I'll remember even more than that 5-day stretch, what led to that. And just how frustrations over time built up because of some losses that piled up, because of a pretty just poor timed and arrogant Gundy comment, and how fans were just ready to maybe move on. And like I said, maybe Gundy proves everybody wrong, has one of these classic OSU seasons that we've seen and makes everybody look silly, but maybe we look next offseason and think, maybe OSU should have done something last year. And I think that that'll also be the interesting thing too, because I think this season's only going to get more interesting as time goes on, because if it's a total outlier in Gundy's tenure, if he coaches for 5-10 more seasons, we'll be like, wow, that season's weird. But if, let's say this is his next to last coaching season, right, as Oklahoma State's head coach and next year's a bad year, we'll kind of look at this year as the beginning of the downfall, the beginning of the end, right, for Gundy. So,
yeah, the the one thing that I've kind of looked into, researched a little bit, and then the known for since I heard Zach Robinson's name basically pop up is that Gundy was a career Oklahoma State's quarterback, and then 16 years later he's the head coach. If Robinson somehow becomes the head coach of Oklahoma State next, not this next season, but the season after, could be 16 years after he was quarterback of Oklahoma State as well too. And the other thing here is that 4 of the 5 teams that received first place votes in the Big 12 preseason wise didn't make it to a bowl game. I mean, Utah, KU, Arizona, Oklahoma State are those 4 teams. The only team that did get preseason votes to be first overall to go to a bowl game is K-State. Of course, they didn't play in the championship game, and they kind of let it go down the stretch, I got to say, after looking like world beaters when they played us, at least, which for it to maybe not be the case that they were really, truly beating the world when they played us. Very, very last one here, though, is that the whole cultural playoff selection show and committee, all type of stuff here, the SEC and Big Ten, et cetera, they're all slimming the amount of conference games they play. Now, granted, they don't need to. They've got plenty of teams to play. It's not like they only have 9 teams. They can only play 8 conference games. Do you think the Big 12 moves to kind of that model? I know recently here, Brett Yormark at press conference said, nope, likes the 9 games, likes doing that, but wanted to look at the drawing board any day of the week. Do you think that's what the Big 12 should do or could do here going forward?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know what the conference will do, but I think the more important thing may be what individual universities decide to do. I mean, you saw today, I believe it was Alabama's athletic director came out on Twitter and he was talking about, hey, I think this just proves that we need to look at our next Power 4, Power 5 games in the next coming years, because clearly if you play a great schedule and drop some games, and that could hurt you. And so I thought that was interesting, and I wonder if that's a philosophy that more teams, with the 12-team playoff having more spots up for grabs for an at-large bid or whatever it may be. I wonder if more teams wonder, hey, maybe we shouldn't schedule the Alabama or Oregon like Oklahoma State has the next few years, right? Maybe we shouldn't do that, and we should focus on either beating out Colorado or Houston or whoever for a Big 12 title game, or just playing well enough in our 9-game season or in our 8-game season or whatever it is to at least get at large bid or something, right? So I think even more than the conferences, because we see how the conference stuff changes, whether that's realignment or scheduling or whatever. Who knows what the conferences are going to do in next season, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. So I think that even more than just the conferences, the universities are always going to hold some sort of power with scheduling. Now, conference games is one thing, but those non-con games I think are going to be really the more interesting thing, I think, just because how important is the Oklahoma State Oregon game going to be next year when, let's say, Oklahoma State somehow goes to Eugene and it beats them, right? That seems pretty insane right now. But what if Oklahoma State ends up being a great team? Let's say they're a top 10 team this season, and Oregon, it hurts them. They're like a fringe playoff team, and they drop out because they lost to Oklahoma State. Then win at Dan Lanning, and then everyone be like, okay, so we shouldn't have scheduled to play Mike Gundy then because we knew we were taking a risk. Or maybe that's what they're thinking down the line with Alabama, and because Alabama, like I said, they're wondering if they should change that. So I don't know. I think that the universities in particular will be a pretty interesting thing, just to see how every game seems important now even more than ever with 12 teams. Being able to slide into a playoff, that maybe the ideology of, hey, we got to get a big win in conference to get our BCS ranking up or to get to that top 4. Now you got 12, so you got some wiggle room. So maybe you don't need to schedule in Oregon or Alabama. Maybe in East Carolina or a Western Kentucky would suffice instead.
Yeah, and I will say I'm also really curious to see how everything plays out with the Big 12 with the previously scheduled non-conference games for Big 12. Mm-hmm. For example, this year we had Arizona play K-State. They're still scheduled to have a home and home, so next year I believe they're still playing that. My memory serves to be correct here, and there were I think also Utah and
Baylor.
Yeah, have the same kind of deal here next season, but looks like there's also going to be some other stuff. And if you're an Oklahoma State fan, yay, we get to go play Oregon next year. At least they won't have Dylan Gabriel as quarterback because he's got to graduate from college at some point. I mean, he took the Alan Bowman route. Props to him because it's working out real well. But I just got to think there's just so many other just goalposts moving and changing stuff here year over year that there may not be a formula anyone's able to even follow correctly, because I don't think there'll be one to follow here for quite some time. So, that's my 2 cents at least here on the whole deal. And excited for next season. Ashton, thanks so much for joining the podcast here at CGA Tour. If you're not already, please follow at the CGA Tour on Twitter, Instagram. Send in some questions here for the next show. And of course, here, make sure to follow Ashton. Hopefully I'm saying this correctly here again. Ashton Slaughter here, at Ashton_Slot, SLOT, on Twitter/X, I guess is what we're going with now.
Whatever the streets are calling it, I guess.
Yeah, I gotta get behind the times at some point here and call it the right thing. I'm showing my age here, being 30, but it's great having you on. Thanks so much for the insight here and the recap of all the Big 12 stuff. Is there, what are you working on this week here? As I know it's finals week in Stillwater. Any other kind of articles that are going to help us understand Oklahoma State sports here coming up?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, the Ocali on Ocali.com, we're constantly updating the website with Oklahoma State sports. We print once a week every Friday, so. Despite it being finals week and all things, but we'll still be in our newsroom Thursday night, cranking out a paper, making sure that readers, if they want, can go pick it up on campus to read it that way. But if you're not on campus or if it's not easy to pick up that physical paper, don't worry. Ocala.com is the way to go. And so you can be updated with presumably some coordinator stories and some more Gundy stories and maybe some more insight just from other people around the situation that aren't just me writing a column or whatever small quote we get from the university. We're trying to work now outside of that and just try and get a full scope of this past week because we, like everybody else, are really intrigued about this past week and what this could mean for Oklahoma State moving forward, specifically with the football program. And so we're trying to give you guys the answers. So, make sure to check out the website and the paper to see those.
Yeah, I got to say, men's women's basketball coverage has been superb so far. Had Oklahoma State win over Providence earlier today to kind of means something for Oklahoma State. The basketball team and men's side seems incredible. Women's team set, I don't know if it was definitely an Oklahoma State record. Got to be, scored 69 points in a half and at 129 a game. And then, of course, wrestling season with David Taylor as his head coach. Sounds weird to say for wrestling, but that is a position title here. The man, the myth, the legend, had David Taylor kicking off the rest of the season's already well underway. So, Ashton, again, thanks so much for joining here on the latest episode of the CGA Tour, and we'll catch you guys again soon.